The suitcase sat in the middle of the empty park bench, black leather, rain-soaked, and unclaimed. Most people would have walked past it. But not her. Sophie's fingers trembled as she wiped the water off the metal tag. No name. No lock. Just a single golden zipper glinting under the streetlight. Curiosity and desperation wrestled inside her chest. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her shoes had holes, her coat barely clung to warmth, and yet, she hesitated. When she finally unzipped it, her breath caught. Bundles of $100 bills filled the suitcase, neat, crisp, untouched. She froze, heart pounding. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. Her reflection in the wet pavement stared back at her, a young woman who'd lost everything but her conscience. She could vanish right now. No one would ever know. No one saw her. But her mother's voice echoed in her head. Sophie, being poor isn't shameful. Losing your honesty is. The rain fell harder, soaking her hair. She shut the suitcase, clutching it tightly. Across the city, a man in a tailored suit sat in a penthouse office, his face buried in his hands. If that suitcase isn't found by morning, he whispered to his assistant, I'll lose everything that mattered. 2 lives, one broken by poverty, the other by regret, were about to collide in a way neither of them could imagine. Sophie stood under a flickering streetlight, clutching the suitcase like it was burning her hands. Her heart pounded as she stared at the police station across the street. Logic screamed at her to walk inside, but fear whispered louder. They'll never believe you. People like her weren't trusted. A homeless girl with no ID, no address, and a suitcase full of cash? They'd think she stole it. So instead, she walked into the diner across the road, the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and tired dreams. She sat in the corner, the suitcase hidden beneath her seat, and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a cup of tea. As she sipped the lukewarm liquid, a story on the small TV above the counter caught her attention. Billionaire Ethan Miles has announced a $50,000 reward for anyone who can safely return a missing black suitcase containing important documents. Her eyes widened. That was it. The exact same suitcase sitting under her feet. She almost laughed at the irony. She could have taken all that money and disappeared. But she didn't. Something inside her wouldn't let her. After a long pause, she stood, took the suitcase, and whispered to the waitress, Can you tell me where Miles Tower is? 2 hours later, she was standing in front of a gleaming skyscraper that reached for the clouds. Her clothes were soaked, her hands shaking, but her resolve was clear. The guard looked at her suspiciously. Do you have an appointment? Sophie lifted the suitcase slightly. No, she said softly. But I think your boss might want to see this. The guard hesitated, then picked up the phone. Within minutes, Sophie's act of honesty would bring her face to face with the billionaire whose heart she was about to change forever. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Sophie stepped out, clutching the heavy suitcase. The penthouse floor was silent, vast, and intimidating, marble floors, glass walls, and a city that glittered below like a galaxy. At the end of the hall stood Ethan Miles, tall, sharp-suited, but visibly weary. His eyes carried the kind of exhaustion that money couldn't erase. You found it? He asked, disbelief and relief tangled in his voice. Sophie nodded slowly. I wasn't sure what to do. But it felt wrong to keep it. He took the suitcase from her hands, opened it quickly, then exhaled in visible relief. You have no idea how much this means to me, he said quietly. She hesitated. There's a reward, right? You said 50,000? His expression softened. He was used to greed, to people wanting something. Yes. Of course. My assistant can. She interrupted, shaking her head. I don't want it. He blinked, confused. You don't, what? I just want to know if you can help me find a job, she said. Something small. I don't want your money, I just need a chance to start over. For the first time, Ethan didn't know what to say. A girl who had nothing had just handed him back a fortune, and asked only for dignity. He stared at her for a long moment, then said softly, You could have changed your life by keeping this. Why didn't you? Sophie looked down, her voice trembling. Because I couldn't live with a full stomach and a guilty heart. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Respect. Ethan motioned for Sophie to sit. You're different, he said quietly. Most people would have taken the money and disappeared. Sophie shrugged faintly. I've disappeared before. It doesn't feel good. He smiled slightly at her honesty, then leaned back in his chair. You said you're looking for work? What kind of job? Anything, she replied quickly. Cleaning, organizing, helping out, whatever you need. Ethan studied her carefully. Her clothes were soaked, her shoes worn through, but her eyes, there was strength there. Not desperation. Integrity. After a pause, he said, All right. I'll give you a chance. But first, let's see what honesty really means to you. He opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. Inside were 10 crisp $100 bills. He placed it on the desk. There's a test. I'll leave you here for 10 minutes. If that money is still there when I return, the job's yours. Sophie's brow furrowed. You're testing me? Let's just say I've learned to be careful, he said, standing up and walking toward the door. When the door shut behind him, Sophie stared at the envelope. It wasn't temptation she felt, it was disappointment. She had just handed him back a fortune, and he still didn't believe her. 10 minutes later, Ethan returned. The envelope lay untouched, exactly where he'd left it. Sophie stood by the window, looking out at the rain. Did I pass your test? She asked quietly. He nodded slowly, guilt flickering across his face. You passed something much bigger than that, he said softly. You reminded me that trust still exists. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt small in the presence of someone who had nothing, but was richer than he'd ever been. The next morning, Sophie returned to the skyscraper, this time not as a stranger, but as an employee. Ethan had offered her a temporary position as an assistant in his charity foundation. It's not much, he'd said, but it's a start. To Sophie, it felt like a miracle. For the first time in months, she had purpose, a desk, a task, and a reason to wake up. At first, she kept to herself, quietly filing papers and organizing donation reports. But Ethan began noticing small things. She stayed late to clean up, left encouraging notes for other staff, and always greeted the janitor by name. She didn't act like she was lucky to be there, she acted like she belonged. One evening, as most of the office lights dimmed, Ethan walked past her desk. You're still here, he said. She smiled lightly. I didn't finish the reports. You said deadlines matter? He chuckled. They do. But so does rest. There was silence for a moment before Sophie asked softly, Why do you live here all alone? You have everything. Ethan's smile faded. Not everything, he said. I built my world chasing success, and somewhere along the way, I forgot what warmth felt like. Sophie looked at him, really looked at him, the expensive suit, the perfect office, and the eyes of a man who'd traded love for control. Maybe, she said gently, you just need to start giving, not building. He turned toward her, something stirring behind his guarded expression. And maybe, he said quietly, you're the one who'll remind me how. That night, either of them realized, this was no longer about a suitcase. It was about two broken souls teaching each other how to feel again. Months passed, and Ethan's world began to look different. The cold marble halls of his mansion no longer felt empty. Laughter and life had found their way in. Sophie had become more than an assistant. She was the heart of the foundation, always finding ways to help others quietly, selflessly. One afternoon, Ethan walked into his office to find Sophie organizing boxes filled with clothes, blankets, and food supplies. What's all this? He asked. She looked up with a shy smile. A new program for homeless youth. We're calling it Second Chance. You told me to think big. He stared at her for a long moment, emotion welling in his chest. You turned a lost suitcase into this, he said softly. Sophie shrugged. You gave me a chance. I just want to do the same for others. Ethan smiled, not the practiced smile of a billionaire, but the genuine one of a man rediscovering meaning. You didn't just return my money, Sophie, he said, voice low. You returned something I thought I'd lost a long time ago, faith. She blinked back tears. Then I guess we both found what we were missing. As they stood together by the window, looking down at the city that once seemed so cold, Ethan knew that wealth wasn't measured in numbers, but in kindness. That night, he quietly rewrote his will, naming Sophie as co-director of the foundation, ensuring her work would live on. Sometimes life doesn't reward those who take, it transforms those who give back. And the girl who once found a suitcase full of cash ended up giving the world something far more valuable: hope.